Hello and welcome to Sammy's Bookshelf. I'm Sammy and today I am going to be showing you all the books that I read in February. Now, I only managed to read 5 books in February, which is kind of below average for me. I usually average around 7 or 8, but we're just gonna blame it on the fact that February is a shorter month. But the first book that I read in February was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, and this was actually a reread. I decided to reread this book because the movie just came out and I really wanted to watch the film, but I really wanted to have the book fresh in my mind so I could actually compare them, and I actually enjoyed it more the second time around. The first time I only gave it a 3 stars, but this time I actually gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I can't pinpoint exactly why I enjoyed it so much more this time around. I guess maybe I was a bit more in the mood for a contemporary enemies to lovers book, but I just had a really great time. It's a really quick read. I loved the 2 main characters and their interactions and their romance. I think it was done really well. It's a classic enemies to lovers romance. I feel like if this book was the book that made everyone obsessed with enemies to lovers. And there's just a lot of really great scenes, and I feel like something I also really like about this book is that it doesn't all necessarily fall into the stereotypical format that contemporary enemies to lovers books usually are, especially in the 3rd act. I don't want to say what it is because it's kind of a spoiler, but if you read the book you know what I mean, and I really enjoyed that. It was a nice change of pace. I'm very excited to watch the movie. I've seen the trailer and it looks like a lot of fun. Like I said, I gave The Hating Game a 4 out of 5 stars. As always, I always have a Cassandra Clare book in all my wrap-ups because I am doing a big Cassandra Clare reread, and in February I read the Bane Chronicles by Cassandra Clare, Sarah Rees Brennan and Maureen Johnson. If you don't know what this book is, this isn't a novel but a collection of short stories that follows the life of Magnus Bane, and it's just bits of snippets of fun stories across his very long life. Magnus Bane is a fan favorite character. He's one of my favorite characters and I really enjoyed this book. I had never actually read the entirety of this book, so with finishing this book in February, I have now read all of Cassandra Clare's bind-up of short stories, and I think this is probably the weakest of them. I think I definitely enjoyed Tales from Shadowhunter Academy, and I can't remember what it's called for some reason, but the Secret Market one. But this was still a lot of fun. My favorite of these short stories is definitely The Midnight Air because it has Jem, Tessa, Will and James in it, and so obviously I had a great time seeing those characters again because they're some of my favorites. I gave The Bane Chronicles a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read in February was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal. This is the first book in a duology. I had really high hopes and expectations going into this book because I have heard such great things, and it's got my favorite trope, enemies to lovers, and so I just had really high expectations going into this book, and unfortunately my expectations were not met. The first act showed a lot of promise and it got me really excited to continue the book. However, I felt like those last 2/3 of the book were quite underwhelming. I feel like the first act just set up this really epic adventure and romance that we were going to go on. It just wasn't as epic as the first act made me believe it was going to be. A big part of why I wanted to read this book was the enemies to lovers romance, but I felt like the romance was quite rushed to me. It's kind of like 1 second they were enemies and like a few conversations later they loved each other, and I just didn't quite buy that. It just felt too soon. I just wish it was more of a slow burn. Continuing on from that, I also just didn't really feel that connected to any of the characters. In this book, we have a ensemble of characters. It's a found family trope, but for that found family trope to be successful, I as the reader really need to connect to the characters, and I just didn't. And I can see what Hafsah Faizal was trying to do with the characterization of each character and them as a group and as an ensemble of characters, but I just felt like it wasn't executed well, especially when I compare it to other books that I love that have that ensemble of of characters and found family trope. There were, however, aspects of this book that I did enjoy. Like I said, I really enjoyed that first act, and I enjoyed the plot and the world that we were in, and I really liked learning about the world. I love the map that's at the beginning of this book. It looks super cool. And I also really like the mythology behind everything. I think all that was really interesting and done really well. It was just the lack of characterization that brought the whole book down for me. I also really wish there was a glossary in this book. There are a lot of words in this book that aren't in English, and there is a glossary on Hafsah Faizal's website, but I felt like I wasted so much time while reading this book going onto my computer and going to her website and finding the glossary and looking through the glossary on my computer, then having to shut my computer and open the book again. I could have gone through this book so much quicker if there was just a glossary at the back of the book or at the front of the book, because it just was really annoying to have to go and open my computer or my phone every time I came across a word that I didn't know. I did still enjoy this book. I liked it. I just feel like it didn't quite live up to the hype. I am going to read the second book though. I am interested to see what's going to happen, but I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read in February was my first ever blind date with a book, which I made a whole video about, which you can go and watch it right now. But the book that I went on a blind date with ended up being As If on Cue by Marisa Kanter. This is a young adult contemporary, and it does very much feel like a young adult book, so I feel like if you're a bit older, you might not enjoy this book. I feel like for me, I was still able to enjoy this book because while I relate a lot more to new adult books because the characters in those are more my age, it was only like 2 years ago that I was in high school, so I can still also relate to these characters. And I definitely related a lot to this book because it is about kids in high school trying to put on a musical, and the book was just so much fun. Like, I just had a great time reading it. The romance is a rivals slash enemies to lovers, and it was executed really, really well, exactly how I like my enemies to lovers to be, and we really got time to stay in their kind of rivalry before anything romantic happened, which was really nice. The main character was kind of annoying, but you know, I can look past that, and it was a really quick read. It was really fun. If you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts, but still non-spoilery but more in-depth, again, go watch my blind date with a book video. But I ended up giving As If on Cue a 4 out of 5 stars. The last book I read in February, and honestly the real reason why I didn't read as many books in February, because this is a big book and you've probably already guessed what it is, but that is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas, one of my most anticipated releases of 2022. I had some drama pre-ordering this book. I pre-ordered this book back in October, which is pretty much right after I read the first book, and so I was like, great, I'm gonna get my book the day of release, hopefully, because I ordered it 4 months prior. And then a couple days before release, I went to go check on my order, and it had it on the product page that it was out of stock, but I kept my fingers crossed that they were just out of stock of pre-orders. Alas, that was not the case, because on the day of release, I got an email from Amazon saying they didn't get the stock in time and that my book would be delayed, which is a scary thing because I wanted to get this book and read it straight away, because people are gonna get that book on the day it's released and like read it in a day and start spoiling, so I really wanted to get it and read it as soon as possible. But thank goodness my bookstore that's like 10 minutes away from me had stock in hardcover, so I went and got it from the bookstore, thank goodness. And I also got a free tote bag, so that was cool too. I am going to be brief when I'm saying my thoughts on this book because this is a sequel and I don't want to spoil anyone who has not read it yet or is still in the middle of reading it, but I am gonna have a full spoiler review of this book up next week. So if you've read this book and you want to discuss all the spoilers, then tune in next week. I loved this book, no surprise here. I love every Sarah J. Maas book. I loved seeing all the relationships and friendships that we saw in the first book strengthen in this book. We just have such a strong ensemble of characters in this book, just like with every other other Sarah J Maas book. We have another mystery running through this book, just like in the first book, and so that was really great to read. I think I might have liked House of Earth and Blood a little bit better than Crescent City. House of Earth and Blood's third act was stronger. I was just more hooked in the third act, and I wasn't as hooked in the third act in this book, although I was hooked in like the last 2 chapters. But like the third act as a whole wasn't as gripping as the first book. I'm not going to say anything else. This book was fantastic. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. So that was all the books that I managed to read in February. Again, a bit of a shorter wrap up this month, but I'm sure in March my reading will pick back up and I'll read a lot more then. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what books you read in February and which was your favorite, and I'll see you next time. Bye!